Hey guys, welcome to another Boundaries.me course, and this time we're talking about codependency. Now, think of that word, you've heard it 1,000 times. Well, he's so codependent or she's so codependent, but do we really know what it means? Now, I want to start out by unpacking actually where the word came from, because I think that'll help us understand when we find ourselves in a codependent situation, whether we are the codependent or no one or whatever it is. It'll help us get to the roots of it. And what we always want to do in Boundaries.me is we don't want to give just answers, what to do, even though we really want to do that. But a lot of times answers that don't understand the root don't get us to the next place where we need to get to. So, codependency, where did it come from? Well, way back before you ever heard the term substance abuser, there was a term in the addiction world called chemically dependent. And what a chemically dependent person was someone who was dependent on a chemical. Heroin, cocaine. Actually, this is before cocaine, sort of. Freud used cocaine, so that spans history. But it was somebody that depended on some sort of a chemical, alcohol, whatever it was. And what they found was when they started treating chemically dependent people, they bring them out of the family and out of their system into an environment called a treatment center. And those units were known as CD units, chemically dependent units, or those for the chemically dependent. Now, what they found was we can help these people and they can get sober, and they're in there for 30 days and they clean up their act and they get sober and everybody's yay. And so then what they did was, hey, you're sober, and they sent them home. And then they found out not too long after that, a lot of them were back where they were before treatment. So they started thinking, what's going on over there that's different than what goes on in the CD unit? And what they found was, as they studied it, that it's very difficult. It is very difficult to be an addict by yourself. Very difficult. You need something called help. Now, we later called the help that an addict gets, or for your purposes, because you may be dealing with way more than addicts. You may be in a boundaries life, like all of us. We run into people who aren't responsible. They're not responsible with their emotions. They're not responsible with their behavior. They're not responsible with their finances. And so we're talking about more than addicts here, okay? So what happens is you put the addict back in the family and they start to study the family, and what they find is there's someone or someones in that house that enable this problem to exist, that the people in the CD unit, the hospital, the treatment center, did not allow that to exist. And so then they started to study those people. And then they said, don't do that. Don't bail them out. Don't set limits. Have boundary, all this stuff. And they told them to do it. And what would they find? That the person couldn't do it. They couldn't say no. They couldn't set limits. And it started to look a lot like the addict, because the addict could not use booze, but the codependent couldn't stand up and say, I'm not going to tolerate that behavior either. They were both dependent on something, and here's what they found. The substance abuser was dependent on the booze or the chemical. The other person, with the chemically dependent person, the other person was dependent on the addict, dependent for approval, dependent to have somebody to feel close to, dependent to feel good about themselves, like they were helping someone, dependent on in 1,000 ways, but they were equally dependent. Ergo, the term codependent. They needed each other to keep going in the face of the other option, which is what you're doing, which is growth and change. And that takes a look at when we feel like we have problem people in our lives. It takes a look back at ourselves. And it's not just about the irresponsible, controlling jerk or whoever that is. It's also, why can't we sometimes untangle ourselves? Because we have our own issues and dependencies that we're dealing with. So we start there, all right? That's codependency. So we're going to be talking about tactics and all of that, about how to deal with problem people, and boundaries are the absolute, biggest 80-20 fix for all of that. But in order to have boundaries, we also have to look in the mirror and say, why do I allow this to go on? Why is it difficult? For what fears, what needs, what drives are keeping me in this? That's when we look at our codependency, because if you're codependent, if we, I should say we, I think all humans have some of this, that we have to look at ourselves. All right. So, quick story. If you've ever heard me talk about codependence, I always like to go back to, I don't know why this is so etched in my brain, but I think it's because everybody that's ever been in any situation, work or family or dating or whatever it is, can identify with someone in the room. And the room was this: I was at the hospital one day, and a family came to see me. It was a mom and a dad and two adult children that they had in their 20s, a young man, a young woman. And the father says, when I asked, why are you here? He said, well, I want you to fix my son. Turned to the young man, I said, what's wrong with you? He said, well, it's not me, it's my brother. There was no brother in the room. And I said, well, where's he? And the father goes, well, he didn't want to come. And I said, well, why didn't he want to come? He said, because he doesn't think he has any problems. I said, well, maybe he doesn't. He said, oh, yes, he does. He's got a lot of problems. He went on to give me this litany of he had flunked out of 3 colleges. He had, each time flunked out because of partying. He had not even chosen a college major. And then I said, well, how old is he? And he said, he's 23. And he hasn't even, gotten really down the road very far. So I was kind of confused. How do you flunk out of 3? I mean, I know how to flunk out of 1, right? But how do you get in the second one after you flunked out of 1, and after you flunked out of 2? How do you get in the third one? I said, how do you keep getting in these colleges? And the father goes, well, I'm on the board of trustees of several, and I got him in. Oh. See, I said it's very difficult to continue these patterns of irresponsible behavior without help. So now we've got a codependent in the story. Now, I won't focus on the rest of it, the rest of the family, and all of that. But what we saw when I started to ask the dad kind of how this unfolds, we got to the place where we were seeing all of this trying to help his son, bailing him out. He'd flunk out. He said, well, that's because of this dormitory is too loud to study. So he bought him a condo off campus. And he didn't want to have him to work or have him work because, you can't take time away from study. And so he gave him plenty of money. And the pattern kept continuing. So when I said to the father, I said, well, you know what? I'm going to teach you something called boundaries. What's happening now is, here's your son's yard, and here's your yard, and he's over in his yard, and he snorts, and you feel the pain, and you pay. And so the problem is the effects of the problem are not falling in the right yard. And I'm going to teach you about boundaries so his behavior starts to affect him instead of affecting you and everybody else. Because he doesn't think he has any problems, right? So here's the deal. I started to say, okay, so we're going to set up a program where I want you to help him. It's great that he has a dad to help him. But the help has got to be tied to some behavior, right? If you don't make your grades in the first quarter, then the check stops. Right? If you flunk out again, then the checks, and we had to, set up a program. I said, so you're going to have to do that. And the father, very smart, looks down the road and he says, well, wait a minute. So you're saying if he doesn't make it, I'm going to cut him off? And I said, well, you might have to cut him off. That's up to him, actually. And he said, well, I will never do it. And he got angry. And I said, why? And then he looks at me. I'll never forget this look. He goes, because I will never do to my son what was done to me. I said, what was done to you? He said, my father died when I was 7, and I was out on the street, and I know what it's like to be in the world without a father's help. And I'll never do that to my son. I said, sir, I would never want you to do that to your son either. If he were 7 and you threw him out on the street, I'd call Child Protective Services because that kid needs a father. But this kid we're talking about, your son, has had way more fathering than he needs. He needs to learn to grow up. He needs to learn to be responsible. So we're going to talk about how to do that. So where do we go from there? Where we had to go to was, I asked him, tell me about being out on the street when you were 7. Now, without going through the whole thing, which would take a while and be very instructive, I'm going to wrap it for you. And that is this, that the father had never really dealt with his own stuff from, being by himself. And that pain that he was carrying around, every time he would say no to his son, he would over identify. In other words, he would see his son as feeling the same kind of devastation and pain that he felt, which was not true. That's a boundary crossover. His pain was the pain of an abandoned 7-year-old. His son's pain was really the anger of a self centered toddler in an adult's body who didn't like to hear the word no and who should be in timeout until they can start to nod. So, how does that relate to us? Well, think about it. We got this kid like dependent on help to keep from growing up, and we got a father dependent on helping to keep from feeling something that he was trying to avoid feeling. That's the codependency. Now, you and I, as we're going to see as we go through this, when we have difficulty in a relationship, setting limits and boundaries, there's probably something we don't want to feel or we don't want to go through. There's some fear, loss of approval, or loss of the connection with a person, or running into anger, whatever it is. But we have to be equipped in ourselves and get equipped to be able to go through what goes with setting limits. And that's why it's called codependency. And that's what I'm going to help you do. So one of the basic laws of boundaries, and one that it actually kind of almost rests on as much as anything, is something called the law of sowing and reaping. Now you've heard about this, right? If you sow, right, you put seeds in the ground, then you're going to reap a harvest, hopefully, all things, being equal. So here's what happens. You depend on that every single day. The universe is built to actually have the law of sowing and reaping be part of what keeps it functioning and what keeps it functioning up and to the right, things getting better. That's how it works. Let me give you an example. Hold your breath. Okay. After a while, you are going to start to feel your body reaping what you are sowing, the behavior of not breathing or holding your breath. You're not being responsible in your need for air. Okay, so what's going to happen? You're going to reap the consequences of not breathing well, and then you're going to go, wait a minute, I can do something about this. And you sow and you reap all sorts of incredible things. Let's take it to when you're on the couch and you've been watching 18 episodes of Game of Thrones or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you feel that hunger pang, right? Then you go, wait a minute, if I sow, if I do something, I will get something good, right? If I walk to the kitchen and if I make myself a sandwich, I will reap relief from my pain and satisfaction with something good. Very, very basic, but it makes everything work. It's why you get up and go to work in the morning. Hopefully, you get up and go to work in the morning because you know you're going to get a paycheck, some fulfillment, purpose, and all that kind of stuff. That's how it works. But see, there's a positive aspect and a negative aspect, and we need that, right? If I got up, started walking, and I ran into the wall, I would reap the pain of not watching where I'm going, and that would help me to get better. Okay, so back to the son. What was happening was boundaries are a property line, right? So there's the dad's property, family's property, whoever it is, the individuals, and the son has his own property, his own boundaries. Sowing and reaping had gotten like this. He was sowing some seeds that should be reaping appropriate consequences. Party all night, shouldn't get checks. Party the next night, all month, all semester. You don't get good grades. You shouldn't get a degree. You don't get the degree, what do you find yourself doing? Not knowing where you're going to do and your opportunities. And see, because we start to feel that pain, then you go, oh crap, I better study, right? Because the law of sowing and reaping, it keeps us honest. Now, I don't mean honest in terms of lying, even though it does keep us honest that way, because we tend to lie to ourselves, but it keeps us honest in our relationship to reality or the truth of what's really going on. Pain is a good thing. One of the worst diseases you can have is when you have a neurological disorder where you can't feel pain, because ultimately your arm falls off. And we've got to be able to feel pain. Now, what people do who don't want to sow responsible behavior and do the hard thing, do the studying, contain their anger, don't get blitzed at Thanksgiving dinner and start to rip on everybody, do their homework and not have to get bailed out at 12 p.m. the night before the exam. Dad's got to run to the store and get the cardboard paper because you forgot it. See, all of that pain is what keeps us looking ahead. It's called signal anxiety. Now, what boundaries do in our development is they get us to the maturity of actually feeling signal anxiety, sowing and reaping, ahead of time. So in September, because he's experienced good boundaries growing up, this kid would have, in September, signaled to himself, gosh, if I don't study, if I go do this, I'm going to feel some pain down the road. What does it do? It orders behavior. And it also orders parts of the brain that begin to get something we call self-regulation, where they get emotional control. Okay? It's why when you see a toddler, what do? You put them in timeout. I remember when my girls were little, I love timeout. I mean, not in a sadistic way, but it was just to watch them mature and how they did it in the struggle. And you put them in there like, and they're mad, right? They don't like no. I remember the first time we put Olivia in there when she was 2, she was like, ah! And Tori, my wife, were in the other room. I told her she had to stay in there a minute or something. We're in the other room. She's screaming, and Tori's going, "That's enough! That's enough!" And I said, "No, it's not." And she goes, "How do you know?" I said, "Because she's still protesting." I said, "Just hang on, hang on." And then you heard the turn to. What did she do? See, the limit contained her where she realized I can't control everybody in the house with my anger. And when she felt that she was powerless to do what? Powerless to make us adapt and give in, come over in her yard and make her happy without her changing, she learned that she couldn't control us. And what did that build? Self-control. She learned, I've got to get in control of my own yard if things are going to go well for the things I want. So then, here's the next phase. You go in there, and she's, and it's past the minute. You're still screaming. And I started to tell her, you can get out when I've heard a minute without you screaming. So now she's learning, because of the boundary, she's got to control her behavior. So take that to adult life. You're in a relationship, the classic one of somebody's got an anger problem. Well, they're not taking responsibility. They're not, taking ownership of their problem with anger and not getting self-control. And what do? They scream at everybody, sowing and reaping. They're screaming. They're reaping no pain from that. Everybody else reaps pain from that. They get depressed. They get anxious. They're walking on eggshells. And see, this person's out of control. They're doing the sowing to irresponsible emotional behavior. This other person is reaping the loneliness. They're reaping the fear. They're reaping the anxiety. It's in every area of life. You see it in a company, on a team. Sometimes one person isn't taking charge of their role and their responsibility, and it's spilling over into the performance of the whole, the profits of the team or the morale or whatever it is. So sowing and reaping helps us to thrive, but we don't like it. And here's why. Because it calls us to take another step to get control of ourselves. Now, ultimately, that's good. really good, because Olivia learned to control her tantrum behavior. She's about to graduate from high school, and she's doing fantastic because she would realize, I can't scream at my teacher. I can't scream at my friends and all that. And so what happens is, when we have people around us, and we all need this, the best friends, the best spouses, the best bosses, the best teammates, when one of us is out of control, they don't adapt and swallow the consequences. Keep bailing them out. Keep stuffing that pain. Keep giving them more money. Keep starting things 15 minutes late and missing the first half of the movie because somebody can't show up on time, or the meeting, or whatever it is. Instead of reaping that, they stand up and say, you know what? I really want to be with you. I want you to be at this dinner. I want us to spend this evening in a great way. But I can't be around you, or I won't allow myself to be around somebody who's calling me names and screaming at me. I just don't do that. You can do that if you want. See, that's on your yard. You can scream if you want, but I'm in control of myself. And what I find is, when I sow to being around people that aren't screaming at me, I feel a lot better. And so that's how it works. So our job as individuals is to always be sowing to behaviors and ways of being and everything that we want to reap something good from. On the opposite side, we can't sow to certain things that we reap what we don't want unless we're going to deal with it. Moment on the lips, forever on the hips. Well, if we want to think about it like, okay, I'm willing to, not achieve my health goals to be able to, have a life like this, then fine. But what happens is, that should affect us, and physically it's usually pretty easy to do. What happens is, emotionally, relationally, somebody else carries the health problem. So that's the law of sowing and reaping. You take a kid, they're on the couch, talked about this. They're playing video games, and the parent comes in, mom or dad, they walk down and say, "What are you doing? You need to go do your homework." And they get all, and they try to control them because they need them to go do their chores, right? Well, what if they didn't need that? What if they transferred that need onto the yard of the person that really it matters? They'd say, you know what, you can not do your chores, but that's up to you. If you don't do your chores, then you're going to miss going to the beach with us. And so, your choice. I got to go. I'm going to do my chores, because people that do their chores get to go to the beach. See ya. But if you're not, you're going to be stuck with a babysitter, for 2 days, because we're going to spend the night out there. So up to you. I'll see you later. All of a sudden they do that. And then now the consequences and that fear. Just like when you say to an addict, if you don't get sober, that's fine, but you can't live here. I won't live with a drunk. Okay. Then all of a sudden that kid goes, "Oh no, I need to do homework, or I won't get to go to the beach. I'm going to be stuck with the babies." Or the addict says, "Oh no, I'm going to lose my family. I need to get sober. I need to go to AA. I got to go to treatment." See, now we're getting the consequences of the behavior on the shoulders of the person who is exhibiting the behavior, so they can begin to develop self control. That's the law of sowing and reaping. All right. Cause them pain. And so sometimes we're not confronting people because you don't want to hurt their feelings, or sometimes, especially with an irresponsible person who actually needs help, then last thing we want to do is abandon them, right? And that's where it gets so difficult. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between healthy care and over responsibility. Now, I'm going to set it up with a very, 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 very simple formula, and that is this: that each person has to do their part of solving the problem. Okay? Each person has to do their part of solving the problem. Here's the second part of that formula: there are parts of solving the problem that you cannot do for the other person. I'll say that again. There are problems that you can't solve, they're part of. In other words, you can't do their work for them. And sometimes when we care, we're wanting to do the work that we cannot do. The wife or spouse or husband or friend or family member of an addict cannot get sober for that person. The parent of a kid wanting them to succeed cannot learn the math tables for them. So it's the for that is the problem. Now, here's another thing I want you to remember. Caring involves responsibility. We have to be responsible to each other in helping. Parents have to be responsible to their children. People in a relationship have to be responsible to each other, to care. And that's what I want you to remember. Be responsible to someone, not responsible for someone, in terms of taking responsibility for the things that only they can control. All right? So let's give an example. Let's take the kid in the homework, even the adult kid in the homework. The dad could not go to class. The dad could not, study. The dad could not say no to himself at 11 o'clock when the friends want to go party the night before the exam. Dad couldn't do that for him. So what do you say? The dad says, well, heck with you. I don't care. No, that's not. Caring is not over responsibility. Caring is a dad that comes in and cares enough to, first of all, do what he was doing, which I applaud. He wanted to help his son get an education. Wouldn't that be great if everybody could have some help to get an education? That's care. But when I care about somebody, I've also got to require that they be responsible for their side of the equation. I can't control your anger for you. I can't go to your AA meetings for you. I can't stick to a budget for you. I can't take care of your problematic feelings that are causing your depression. Now let's talk about that one for a second. I remember this so clearly when I was, early on in my career as a psychologist. First time I worked in a hospital, people would check in horribly depressed, sometimes suicidal, and your heart just bleeds. And I did, and I care. That's why I went into this profession, because I care. Really, I really do. They check in, and you know what? They check in, and sometimes they think, oh, finally, somebody's going to fix me. Somebody's going to cure my depression. Well, they're right and they're wrong. We are going to find a fix. Because here's what they find. See, they think that they're going to come in, we're going to make this depression go away. And kind of from our side of the equation, we are, in as much as we can do what we can do. But there are things I can't do for that person. So here's what they find. 8 o'clock, actually it's earlier, 6:30 the next morning. So knock at the door. It's Nurse Ratchet, and she's saying to this poor depressed person, "Come on, you got to get out of bed. You got to go get your meds. You got to fill out your forms before group." And guess what? When you get in group, they're going to call on you. They want you to talk. And guess what? Sometimes when that pain starts to come up, you got to let it out. You got to put words to it. I can't do that for you. See, we can't do the emotional hard work for somebody. What we can do is care to, I could provide the workbooks that would give the right questions. I went to a lot of trouble to make this space. I could provide the expertise that I went to school for to learn, and I will give that to you and provide expertise around you and other doctors and nurses. That is what we can do in our caring. What we can't do is show up for you. What we can't do is be open for you. What we can't do is that risky next step of taking that challenging growth step that you have to take, that's built into the universe to make us stronger. A trainer can help somebody, but they can't pick up the barbell. Only the person can do that. So you can care, but you can't be responsible You have to require. Can't be responsible for what they have to be responsible for. In order to get better, you have to be responsible to them by requiring it, or they have some kind of consequences. That is the difference in caring and taking responsibility for someone. So, have you ever asked the question, why do they do this? I mean, you should, right? We talked about codependency. Like, why do I keep banging my head up against the wall? Why do I do this? Why do I do this? I remember I was sitting on an airplane with a lady one day, and I told her I was a psychologist, which you should never do on an airplane because you'd be talking forever about something. And she said, "Oh, my boyfriend, I need help with my boyfriend." I said, "What's wrong with your boyfriend?" And she goes, "Well, we just broke up, and I miss him so much, and I can't stand it, and we break up, and then I can't stand it, and then I get back together with him, and then we have the same problem, and then I break up, and then I can't stand it, and then we get back together." She said, "We just broke up again, and I can't stand it, and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, what's the problem you keep breaking up over?" She goes, "His anger. He's just angry. I mean, he's angry like." Sometimes he's not, but when he is, I just can't live with it. And I said, "Well, when does he get angry?" She said, "Well, kind of." She started describing a bunch of situations, basically. So he gets angry when you won't do what he wants, right? She goes, "Yeah, I guess that's true." So he gets angry when you say no to him. She goes, "Yeah, that's really true." And you go back. She goes, "Yeah, I go back." I said, "What does that do?" She said, "It calms him down, and we're fine as long as I like whatever he's doing or what he wants to do." But then there you go, he gets angry again, and I go back. I said, "Well, there's an old proverb that says this. It says, if you rescue an angry man, you'll only have to do it again." She goes, "Wait a minute, what? Where is that?" I said, "It's in the book of Proverbs." She goes, "That's me. That's what I keep rescuing, and I have to do it again." And I go, "Great. So let's ask why." And see, that gets us to the kernel of all this. Why would she go back and do it again? Because there's something we talked about, the codependent she needs. Now, I'm going to give you a few things here. In her case, What she really needed was she needed the attachment, because when she would say no, she would go into and separate. She'd go into this black hole of aloneness, which in a breakup should not ever happen. A breakup or saying no to somebody that you're connected to should send you into sadness and pain and sometimes loss if it's going to be a while, or even sometimes it might be forever, but it shouldn't be an alone pain. See, because when you're connected to people, that's why codependency groups, boundaries groups, help people, because they go back and they're not alone in that pain and they're supported through that. So sometimes there's something in her case, she just couldn't stand losing the attachment to him. Okay, let's talk about some other ones. There are some people that can't say no, or they can't disagree. You see this in work settings all the time, because somebody's not going to approve of them anymore. If you don't agree with them, they don't approve of you. Well, they don't really, mourn the connection. They're grieving the approval. They have this need for approval. They have to have everybody like them, or everybody even people that don't even matter. They got to have them like them, and they got to feed this. Everybody's got to like me. And you see some people do some pretty crazy things when they have a need for approval from everyone. You remember this: when everybody speaks well of you, woe is you. Whoa, that's not good, because when you, not everybody's going to like you. But here's the thing: choose the people that are going to be angry at you. And what do I mean by that? Because if you have good boundaries, the control freaks and the addicts, they're going to be angry. The good people, the loving people, the people you want to have around you will respect your no. They'll respect how you feel when you share it. They'll go, "Gosh, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. Let's work this out." See, you can't have everybody like you, but you can choose the kind of people you want to like you. And when the loving, caring, honest, responsible, challenging, good feedback, good luck, when those people are liking you, pretty good sign. Okay? When the control freaks are not liking you because you're saying, "No, I'm not going to bail you out for the 96th time in a row," when they're mad, that's probably a good sign too. But to get at that, you got to get to this need of approval. So we talked about connection, we talked about approval, validation, affirmation, a lot of different things. What is it you need from that person that's keeping this pattern going? Now, it doesn't mean that as a human you don't need it, but what it means is that need is not getting satisfied there. So if that person's not going to approve, but you have people that validate you and build you up and like you, you can go into that meeting with somebody who doesn't like you or doesn't approve of you, and it'll turn it, because you're strong, grounded in these other relationships, and you go, "Yeah, I got my friends that I get along with. I'll never get that person's approval. What's for lunch?" See, because I'm not asking you to do away with needs. Now, inordinate needs, yes, like the need for everybody to approve you. Every human needs some people to like them and to validate them. You just don't need everybody, because you're not going to get it. So let's deal with those needs and get them met, and then you can have better boundaries. Okay, so now let's talk about removing yourself from codependent relationships. I kind of hate that sentence. You know why? Because people can take it too often literally, meaning I've got to can the relationship. Well, there's a lot of relationships you don't want to can, right? Like your spouse or your kids or family or coworkers or whatever. But let's flip it a little to a different meaning. Removing yourself from codependent relationships and exchanging them with non codependent relationships with the same person. Now that's better, right? Because now we're healing our relationships. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes the relationship won't end. That happens. But here's my biggest, like, I want to scream sometimes. You see people that have no boundaries in their relationships, and they put up with all this stuff. And they put up with it, put up, and then finally they go, enough! I can't take this anymore, and they get rid of the relationship, and they say, I'm going to have a boundary. I'm done with you. Well, you know what? That's not even a boundary. That's a running from boundaries. That's like if you were in your house and there's a little oil fire on the stove, you're like running out of the house and saying, I'm moving down the street, and you just let the whole thing burn down. Now, might you have to run out of a house that's burning down? You might have to, but maybe the first thing you want to do is to have boundaries in the house, right? You have boundaries with that kid. You have boundaries with that spouse, with that girlfriend, with that boyfriend, with that coworker. And in that, when you start to say, you know what, I love you and I really want to be with you, what I can't do is I can't be with somebody who's on heroin. Okay, I can't be living in the house with somebody on heroin because I can't control you. I can control me. And what I will say, I have this rule in my life: I don't live with people on heroin. Now I want to live with you. Okay, so what that means is, yeah, we can be together, but it's going to require that you not be on heroin. So that means maybe you got to get some treatment. I'll help with that. I'll care about all of that. But see, what have I done now? What I've done is I've opened a door to remove myself from a codependent relationship, hopefully without removing myself from the relationship. See, what we've done is we've changed the way we relate. Now, you can only be in charge of one side of that equation. Like you were the kid, for example, you have a little more leverage, right? Because you control all the resources. But you can stop having codependent relationships today with everybody. All you have to say is, "Mom, when they go, I forgot I got this big assignment tomorrow, and I need some cardboard paper." Well, let's remove myself from that codependent relationship. I'm going to get rid of the kid. I'm going to remove myself from being codependent with the kid. Gosh, that's really tough, Johnny. We talked about, remember, at the beginning of the week, I said, do you have everything you need for all your assignments? And you said, yeah. Well, I can't tonight. I'm going out to dinner. So I don't know what you're going to do. I guess you have to deal with your teacher in the morning. Okay, so now I have removed myself from a codependent relationship by stopping my codependency. All right. So here's the thing: when we just bail on somebody, sometimes you have to, and there are some times you have to. Physical danger, abuse. A lot of times we see women who are being domestically abused. You don't go back in there and try to talk them out of it one more time by saying, I've learned how to, say no. Probably, what we want to do is remove yourself from the codependent relationship by going to a shelter. Because sometimes you need protection. Most times it's not that bad, and we can start with removing myself from being part of the dynamic that continues this. But on the other side of it, sometimes you say to the heroin addict, or you say to the drunk, or you say to the non-performing employee, you know what, I want, see, here's kind of how this works. Whoever sits in that chair, in that role, is going to be showing up to meetings and turning things in on time and this, that, and the other. I really hope that's you, but whoever sits in that chair around this table with this team, that's what they're going to look like. Now, I hope that's you. You get to choose whether or not you want to operate that way. And then They get to self-select. And sometimes they don't want to do it. They don't want to stop their anger. They don't want to stop their heroin. They don't want to stop their abuse. And in those times, you remove yourself from the relationship, right? But basically by putting up a boundary where they self-select out of it because you've made requirements. And then, key, never let go of a trapeze unless another one's in your other hand. That's why you've never seen anybody have boundaries and fall into a vacuum of despair and loneliness and guilt and all that kind of stuff and be able to kind of climb their way out of it. We need to fall into community. We know everything from all the research tells us that you've got to be plugged in to the people that are going to help support you in building better boundaries. Why do you think there's something called Al-Anon? Because for AA to work in those family systems, the partner goes to Al-Anon and has the support to do the hard thing. So removing yourself from codependent relationships, it can be in a dynamic, removing yourself from the dynamic. Sometimes because of the dynamic, it can be that you do remove yourself from the relationship, but don't fall into a vacuum when you do. So here's a word for you. You hear it all the time, or you see it in the checkout lane in the grocery store. How to build selfhood. Selfhood. What is selfhood? Well, it's like, who are you? We have a self. A self is a very technical term. I'm going to go there first. A self, when you talk about, when a psychologist talks about a self, we're talking about the subjective experience of all of the objective aspects of who you are. What does it feel like to be you? What does it feel like to be me? In myself, who am I? See, that's a self. It's a structure. You're like a building, right? You've got skin boundaries and a frame. You got a body, and you have a mind, and you have a heart, and you have a soul, and all of those added together equals a person. Now, when that person is not whole, intact, by themselves. Now, I don't mean by yourself alone in the universe, because there is no such thing as an intact self who's not in relationship with other selves. We exist in relationship. But, like I said earlier, you can't ask somebody else to do something for you that you have to do for you, and vice versa. So your heart, your mind, your soul, your body, all of these parts of you have got to be, I'm not saying perfect, but they got to be whole. We have to kind of have all of them. Now, some people, instead of taking responsibility, I should say all people, there's parts of ourselves we haven't developed, right? Sometimes, I haven't looked in my heart and wondered, what's in there that I want to do? What do I really care about? I don't really know what I want to care about. So there's a vacuum in there in that selfhood. So what's going to step in there? Well, somebody will tell you what you care about. You should be a doctor, or you should go into technology, or you should do this, or you should be a mom, or you should not be a mom. You should have a career, or whatever it is. People will come and step over your boundaries and define yourself for you. Now, when we have some part of ourselves, our mind, our limits, our boundaries, our feelings, whatever those treasures are that we're not developing, then what happens is we find the identity for those, and actually they kind of get filled up, or we want somebody else to fill that up for us. And that's where we do, instead of a relationship, we do a merger. right? When a company doesn't have something that it needs, they don't have the technology they need or the sales force they need. What do? They merge with another company, so now they have it. Now that works because then they can become one company, right? And now they've got different departments. In a person, you can't do that. See, if I don't develop strength, right? If I can't stand up and say no, then I can't merge with another person and have them be my no muscle for me. A lot of people do that. Passive people get attracted to very aggressive people because they like that strength the person has because they have to develop their own. Well, the problem is that strength gets, to crush them, and we still have to develop our own. So that's why boundaries.me and everything we do here, we're really talking about becoming healthy. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different aspects to this. Because as you develop your boundaries, it's not just about the fences around your property, it's about the wholeness of that house that's on the property and that yard that's thriving and has grass and trees and flowers and all of that. And that doesn't mean you live under yourself. You have a gate, right? And that gate on that fence, you can open up those boundaries to good things to come even make your house better or your life better. And you can leave and go and visit somebody else's house. But you also have enough supplies. So when that shyster comes to your door and offers you something that's going to ruin your life, you can close that door and say, no, thank you. I don't need that because I'm okay. See, selfhood, personhood, wholeness, what we call integrity, being integrated, being the best you that you can be, then that's going to give you the strength to be able to close your gate when you need to close it, have good boundaries, and not let the wolves into your yard.
In the last several decades of addiction treatment, one of the most powerful discoveries has been the role of the codependent in addictions. Basically, researchers learned that an addict needs a codependent to enable staying addicted. But beyond that, codependent people continually find themselves in relationships with addicts. In my experience with codependents, I've often heard, out of all the people in the world, I will be drawn to the addict before anyone else. One reason for this attraction is that there is a match. The addict does not take responsibility for his life, and the codependent feels responsible to take care of people who are not taking responsibility for themselves. So the addict and the codependent will be drawn to people who fill their needs, and it works, for a while, until, when the codependent finally asks the question, what is it about me that always draws me into this kind of relationship? Then she learns what codependency is and begins to work on it. Once she gets further down that path and changes those patterns, her whole world begins to look different. It is no longer filled with addicts, but with loving and responsible people. Volia, she changed, and the world changed. Even when a situation is someone else's fault, we sometimes play a part in it. At the very least, we may be failing to confront an individual and set boundaries. When that happens, we enable the problem to continue, and we must ask ourselves, what is my part in this? When I was trained in addictions treatment, I was taught that the codependent plays a role in the addiction of the person they are connected to, and when I began to interact with clients, I was amazed at how true that was. Change the codependent, and the addict often changes as well. I was pretty impressed with the wisdom of the addiction specialists when I was a grad student. When we understand our part in a negative situation and do what we need to do, we can change the situation, or at least change ourselves. Whatever negative issues we are facing, change begins when we ask ourselves, what inside of me needs to change for this to get better?